Picture yourself marooned on a remote, uninhabited island, your only companions being the relentless crash of ocean waves and the gentle sway of palm fronds in the wind. Just days before, the vessel you were traveling on met its tragic fate, shattered against nearby rocks. You are the sole individual to have survived from your crew. With scarce supplies and no immediate prospects of rescue, you're thrust into the ultimate challenge of endurance, forced to depend solely on your intelligence and unwavering will to stay alive. This was the exact predicament Pedro Serrano endured, a man whose extraordinary ordeal has echoed through history for over 4.5 centuries. Join us as we explore Pedro's courageous struggle against hunger, seclusion, and the unforgiving forces of nature into the deep. Because of the antiquity of this tale, there is minimal verified information regarding Pedro Serrano's birth and formative years. However, what is known is that around the mid-1500s, this Spanish mariner embarked on a journey aboard a trading ship headed across the Atlantic Ocean toward the Americas. This expedition would soon descend into horror. One ominous night, a fierce tempest tore apart the vessel he was aboard, obliterating it entirely. Every passenger and crew member aboard lost their lives except Pedro. Being an adept swimmer, he managed to reach a tiny, deserted island off the northeastern coast of South America, far removed from common maritime paths. Though the precise coordinates of the island remain a mystery, many believe that Pedro's ship met its end near Serranilla Bank, a remote, sandy atoll nestled in the Caribbean Sea. Upon waking the following day, Pedro grasped the devastating reality of his circumstance. The island was stark and empty, offering little more than patches of grass and a handful of trees. Most devastating of all. Yet, the island lacked any source of drinkable water, further diminishing his already slim odds of making it out alive. Pedro quickly explored the island and the nearby coral reef, desperately seeking anything edible. He came across a small cluster of shellfish, which he had no choice but to eat raw. While this kept him going for a short while, Pedro knew that if he had any hope of surviving over an extended period on the sandy islet, he would require a more stable food supply. Fortune smiled on Pedro when, one day, while examining the shallow lagoon, he noticed turtles swimming close to shore. He understood exactly what that signified. They would crawl onto the beach after dark to lay their eggs. As night descended, Pedro concealed himself behind a rock formation, remaining motionless and quiet, surrounded by encroaching shadows. Time crawled by, and the air grew increasingly dense with suspense. Eventually, the turtles began emerging from the sea, slowly dragging themselves onto the land. With the help of his knife, one of the few items he had managed to salvage from the wreck, Pedro captured and slaughtered several turtles. Their meat provided vital nourishment, while their empty shells were used to gather rainwater, a rare but life-saving necessity. Days blurred into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months. Pedro endured the brutal climate without shelter, exposed to the searing heat of the sun and the fury of violent storms. He subsisted entirely on the turtles that ventured ashore and the sporadic rainwater that pooled in their discarded shells. As time dragged on, Pedro tirelessly sought a method to ignite a fire. He understood that flames would allow him not just to cook, but also to alert any ships passing nearby. The shoreline was littered with debris, stray seaweed, driftwood, and the remnants of broken vessels, plenty of potential firewood. But without flint, all of it remained useless. While his knife could act as steel, the challenge was finding the right type of rock. The island, little more than a harsh sandbar, offered nothing easily. Pedro searched relentlessly, examining every part of the island in hopes of discovering a stone capable of producing sparks. But each search led to disappointment. No flint was to be found. Unwilling to give up, Pedro turned his attention to the sea. As a skilled swimmer and diver, he began combing the ocean floor, looking for anything resembling the right kind of stone. After countless dives, he eventually found 2 rocks that seemed to have the right texture and shape. Renewed with a spark of optimism, he carried them back to shore and rubbed them together until he shaped a sharp edge. He had already gathered a heap of dried seaweed. With his makeshift flint and steel ready, he struck the stones against his knife. It took multiple tries, but at last, a spark flew, catching on the tinder. Flames danced to life, casting light and warmth, an essential triumph against the crushing solitude. For the first time in months, Pedro tasted a cooked meal, an ordinary comfort that reignited his spirit. 3 long years went by on the isolated island. During that time, Pedro's clothes fell apart, and his hair and beard grew long and tangled. His body began to change, adapting to the unforgiving conditions, growing a layer of coarse hair that offered slight protection from the weather. Often, he would spot ships passing far in the distance. Yet, his desperate attempts to signal went unseen. The crushing solitude must have been unbearable. One can only imagine how Pedro's existence melted into a relentless loop. Brief hope sparked each time a ship appeared on the distant horizon, followed by soul-crushing disappointment as they sailed away, unaware of his presence. Then, one unforgettable morning, Pedro awoke suddenly, his eyes blinking through the smoky haze of his fire. What he saw nearly made his heart stop, a human face gazing at him through the mist. The man, like Pedro, was a Spaniard. He had been shipwrecked the night before and had clung to a piece of floating wreckage until he finally reached the island. As he drew closer, fear surged in both men. The newcomer was shaken by Pedro's wild, rugged appearance, while Pedro, mad from solitude, was stunned by the sight of another soul and suspected it might be a ghostly vision. Overwhelmed by panic, both men turned and fled, each thinking the other was a trick sent by the devil himself. Pedro, trembling in terror, called out to the skies, begging for divine protection from what he believed was a phantom. Hearing Pedro's anguished cries, the other man stopped in his tracks. He recognized the language and the pain behind the voice. "Brother," he shouted, "don't flee. I'm a Christian, as I believe you are too." Comforted by this shared humanity, the 2 castaways slowly came together, eventually forming a fragile bond. They adapted to island life as partners, dividing the daily chores, keeping the fire alive, gathering seaweed, fishing, and collecting driftwood. With 2 sets of hands, they were now able to flip over and catch even larger turtles, securing a steadier source of food. Time wore on. Another 4 years passed. The 2 companions often stood watching ships fade in the distance, hearts breaking again and again as their smoke signals went unnoticed. Until one day, fate intervened. A ship veered closer than any had before. The 2 men rushed to stoke their fire, building it high with urgency, and this time they were seen. A small boat detached from the larger vessel, making its way toward the shore. Overcome with joy and desperation, Pedro and his friend bolted across the beach to greet their rescuers. But the sight of 2 ragged, overgrown figures charging toward them stopped the sailors cold. Fear crept in. They believed they were facing wild beasts or creatures. Pedro and his companions shouted in Spanish, trying to calm the crew and explain. At last, the sailors understood. These were not monsters, but fellow Spaniards who had endured unimaginable isolation. Pedro and his companion were brought aboard the ship, which was homeward bound for Spain. There, Pedro would go on to tell the tale of how he managed to endure 7 grueling years on a remote, lifeless atoll. Tragically, the hardships had taken a terrible toll on his companion, who did not survive the journey back. Once again alone, Pedro bore the heavy burden of their shared suffering, the ghosts of their survival still haunting him. After his return to Spain, sometime shortly after 1550, Pedro was finally reunited with his family, who had long assumed he perished at sea. For the rest of his days, Pedro shared his incredible account of endurance, a powerful reminder of the human spirit's capacity to fight against impossible odds. The tale of Pedro Serrano remains a haunting example of the razor-thin boundary between life and death, and the astounding resilience a person can summon in order to survive. His story, documented in the royal commentaries of Peru by Garcilaso de la Vega, stands as a lasting tribute to human determination and the will to persevere. Thank you for joining us on another deep dive into survival. If this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories of courage and adventure. Until we meet again, stay safe.